The midnight moon cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Redemption Springs as Abigail Porter stepped off the stagecoach, her face half hidden beneath the wide brim of her bonnet. The year was 1878, and like many before her, she had come west seeking a fresh start, but unlike most, she carried secrets that would make even the most hardened frontier folk recoil in horror. The small town of Redemption Springs, Colorado Territory, slumbered peacefully as Abigail gathered her modest belongings. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her plain gray traveling dress, worn but well-maintained, like a woman who understood the value of appearances. She had chosen this remote outpost with careful deliberation, far enough from St. Louis that her past might remain buried. "Madam, you'll be wanting the boarding house," the stagecoach driver said, pointing toward a two-story wooden structure with a small sign swinging in the evening breeze. "Mrs. Holbrook runs a decent establishment. Tell her Joseph sent you." Abigail nodded her thanks, her voice soft when she finally spoke. "I appreciate your kindness, sir. Not much kindness out here in these parts," he warned, handing down her single trunk. "But folks in Redemption Springs tend to mind their business, which might suit you just fine, I reckon." The man's perceptiveness unsettled her, but she maintained her composure. 5 years of hiding had taught her the art of concealing her emotions. At 26, Abigail had learned to keep her eyes lowered and her words measured. The boarding house was modest but clean, with faded floral wallpaper and the lingering scent of beef stew. Mrs. Holbrook, a stout widow with sharp eyes that missed nothing, showed her to a small room on the second floor. "Breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 6 in the evening," the older woman explained briskly. $2 a week, including meals. "What brings you to our little town, Miss Porter?" "I'm hoping to secure a position as a schoolteacher," Abigail replied, the story she had rehearsed flowing smoothly. "I understand the previous teacher departed rather suddenly." Mrs. Holbrook's expression softened slightly. "Measles took her, poor thing. Town's been without proper schooling for nearly 2 months. The children are running wild as jackrabbits." "I have experience," Abigail offered. It wasn't a lie she had taught before, in another life. "You'll want to speak with Mayor Daniels tomorrow. His office is next to the general store." Mrs. Holbrook paused at the door. "Word of advice, Miss Porter. Redemption Springs is small. Folks notice newcomers. Best to be forthright about your intentions." Abigail forced a smile. "Of course, I have nothing to hide." The first lie of many she would tell in this town. Morning brought brilliant sunshine streaming through her window. Abigail dressed carefully in her best dress, a modest navy blue with a lace collar that had seen better days. She arranged her auburn hair in a simple chignon, applied a dab of rose water behind her ears, and practiced her expression in the small mirror, pleasant, unassuming, forgettable. The town looked different in daylight. Redemption Springs consisted of one main street flanked by wooden buildings in various states of repair. A church steeple rose proudly at one end, while the other culminated in a lively saloon already doing business despite the early hour. Between them lay the general store, a barber shop, a small bank, and other establishments that served the town's modest population. Mayor Daniels proved to be a portly man with an impressive mustache and a businessman's calculating gaze. He listened to Abigail's carefully crafted history education at a respected ladies' seminary in Boston, teaching experience in St. Louis, a desire to experience the frontier with polite interest. "References?" he inquired, tapping his fingers on his desk. "I have letters," she said, producing several carefully forged documents that had cost her nearly a month's savings. He scanned them perfunctorily. "We're not in a position to be particular, Miss Porter. The school has been closed too long already. When can you start?" "Immediately, if you wish." "Excellent. The position pays $30 a month. The schoolhouse is at the edge of town, and there's a small cottage attached where you'll live. Mrs. Holbrook can point you in the right direction." As Abigail walked out of the mayor's office, a sense of cautious optimism washed over her. Perhaps here, in this dusty frontier town, she could finally stop running. Her reverie was shattered by a commotion in the street. A magnificent black stallion reared dramatically, nearly trampling a young boy who had darted into its path. The rider, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in typical cowboy attire controlled the animal with impressive skill before dismounting in a fluid motion. "Timothy Granger, what in tarnation are you doing running in front of horses?" the man demanded, though his voice carried more concern than anger. He knelt before the wide-eyed child. "You could have been killed, son." "Sorry, Mr. Yates," the boy mumbled. "Was chasing after Billy's frog." The cowboy ruffled the boy's hair. "Well, next time let the frog go. Your mama would skin me alive if anything happened to you." It was only when he straightened that he noticed Abigail watching. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and something electric passed between them. His eyes were an unusual amber color, startling against his sun-darkened skin and the dark hair that curled beneath his worn Stetson. Abigail looked away first, her heart racing inexplicably. When she dared to look back, he was still watching her, a curious expression on his face. "Xavier Yates," Mrs. Holbrook's voice suddenly said beside her, making Abigail jump. "Owns the largest cattle ranch in the territory. Stubborn as the day is long, but decent enough. Widowed 3 years back when his wife died in childbirth. The baby, too." "How tragic," Abigail murmured, unable to look away as the man mounted his horse again. "Tragic indeed. He's not been the same since. Keeps to himself mostly, except for town business. He's on the school board, so I expect you'll be seeing more of him." Abigail's stomach tightened with apprehension. The last thing she needed was scrutiny from anyone, especially someone observant enough to sit on a town council. "I should prepare for my first day of teaching," she said, eager to retreat from both the cowboy's penetrating gaze and Mrs. Holbrook's gossip. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with rows of wooden desks facing a larger desk and blackboard. The attached cottage was humble, just 2 rooms with basic furniture, but to Abigail, it represented freedom. Here, she could close her door against the world. Here, she might find peace. She spent the afternoon cleaning both buildings and organizing the meager teaching supplies. As dust motes danced in the late afternoon sunlight, she allowed herself to believe this deception might work. She might truly become Miss Abigail Porter, schoolteacher. The creak of the schoolhouse door shattered her moment of contentment. She whirled around to find Xavier Yates filling the doorway, his tall frame blocking the light. "Miss Porter, I presume?" His voice was deep, with a slight rasp that suggested he didn't use it often. "Yes," she replied, automatically taking a step backward. "May I help you?" He removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Xavier Yates. I'm on the school board. Thought I'd come by and see if you needed anything before you start tomorrow." His politeness didn't mask the assessment in his gaze. He was studying her, and Abigail felt transparent beneath those amber eyes. "That's very kind, but I believe I have everything I need," she said, trying to maintain her composure. He nodded, stepping further into the room and glancing around. "Mayor Daniels says you're from back east originally." "Boston," she confirmed, sticking to her story. "Though I taught most recently in St. Louis. Long way from St. Louis to Redemption Springs. I wanted adventure," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The frontier seemed like the place to find it. His lips quirked slightly. "Most folks coming west are running to something or from something. Miss Porter, which is it for you?" The directness of his question startled her. I beg your pardon." He shrugged those broad shoulders. "Just making conversation. Didn't mean to pry." But his eyes said otherwise. Xavier Yates was not a man easily fooled, and Abigail sensed danger in his perceptiveness. "How many children will I be teaching?" she asked, changing the subject. 23, ages 6 to 14. "Some can only come when farm work allows. They're good kids, mostly." He settled his hat back on his head. "Town's grateful to have a teacher again. We value education out here, contrary to what you might have heard about the West. I'm looking forward to meeting them," she said, and this at least was true. Teaching had been her salvation once before. Xavier lingered, his gaze uncomfortably direct. "Well, if you need anything, my ranch is north of town. The double Y." He paused. "Welcome to Redemption Springs, Miss Porter. Hope you find what you're looking for here." After he left, Abigail sank into her chair, heart pounding. She couldn't afford to attract interest, especially not from someone as prominent and observant as Xavier Yates. She would need to be more careful, more forgettable. Yet as she prepared for bed that night in her tiny cottage, she found herself remembering the intensity of his amber eyes and wondering about the tragedy that had shaped him. Loss recognized loss, and she had seen it written in the lines of his face. She shook her head at her foolishness. Curiosity was a luxury she couldn't afford. Xavier Yates, like everyone else in Redemption Springs, must remain at arm's length if she hoped to keep her secrets buried. Morning came too quickly. Abigail dressed in her most severe outfit, a high-necked brown dress with minimal trim, and arranged her hair in a tight bun. She needed to project authority and respectability. The schoolmarm was a pillar of frontier communities, and she intended to fulfill that role flawlessly. The children arrived in small groups, eyeing her with the frank curiosity of youth. Abigail greeted each one warmly, making mental notes of names and ages. By 9 o'clock, 20 children had assembled, ranging from tiny Emma Granger, barely 6, to lanky Thomas Wilson, nearly 15, and clearly uncomfortable to still be in school. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I am Miss Porter, your new teacher. I look forward to getting to know each of you as we learn together." The morning progressed better than she had dared hope. The children, though rowdy from weeks without structure, responded well to her firm but kind approach. By noon, when she dismissed them for the lunch hour, Abigail felt a genuine smile forming. This might work after all. She was arranging books for the afternoon lessons when a shadow fell across her desk. Looking up, she found Xavier Yates once again filling her doorway, this time with a young girl at his side. "Miss Porter," he said with a slight nod. "This is my ward, Elizabeth. She's been staying with her aunt in Denver, but returned yesterday. I'd like to enroll her in your school." The girl beside him was perhaps 10 or 11, with a solemn face and the same striking amber eyes as her guardian. She regarded Abigail warily. "Of course," Abigail said, smiling at the child. "We'd be delighted to have you, Elizabeth. We're just about to begin our afternoon session, if you'd like to stay." The girl looked up at Xavier, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on, Lizzie. I'll pick you up at 4. After a moment's hesitation, Elizabeth took a seat near the back of the classroom. Xavier lingered, his expression unreadable. "She's shy," he said quietly. "Lost her parents in an Indian raid 3 years ago. My wife's brother and his wife. After my Sarah died, I couldn't care for Lizzie properly, so she went to her aunt in Denver. But she needs stability now." Abigail was surprised by this personal disclosure. "I'll take good care of her, Mr. Yates." Something in his face softened. "I know you will, Miss Porter. That's why I brought her back now." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. As the children filed back in for the afternoon session, Xavier tipped his hat and departed, leaving Abigail wondering about the complexities of the man behind the stoic cowboy exterior. Elizabeth Yates proved to be bright but withdrawn, answering questions correctly when called upon, but volunteering nothing. Abigail recognized the signs of grief and determined to draw the child out gradually. By the end of the day, she had coaxed a tiny smile from the girl during a particularly engaging geography lesson. When Xavier returned, he found Elizabeth and Abigail poring over a map of the United States together. "And this is where we are," Abigail was saying, pointing to Colorado territory. "Can you find where you were staying in Denver?" Elizabeth's small finger traced northward. "Here. And Uncle Xavier's ranch is here, north of town." "Very good," Abigail praised, looking up to find Xavier watching them with an expression that made her breath catch. There was something vulnerable in his gaze, something raw that vanished the instant he realized she had noticed. "Ready to go home, Lizzie?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. The girl nodded, carefully placing the map back on Abigail's desk. "Thank you, Miss Porter," she said shyly. "You're very welcome, Elizabeth. I'll see you tomorrow." As they left, Xavier paused in the doorway. "Would you care to join us for supper on Sunday after church? Mrs. Morales, our housekeeper, insists on meeting Lizzie's teacher." The invitation caught Abigail off guard. "That's very kind, but Mrs. Morales makes the best apple pie in the territory," he added, and there was something almost boyish in the way his lips quirked upward. "Please, Miss Porter?" Elizabeth asked, her small voice hopeful. Faced with 2 pairs of identical amber eyes, Abigail found herself nodding. "Thank you. I'd be delighted." After they left, she questioned her decision. Social engagements meant questions, conversation, the risk of slipping up. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret accepting. There was something about Xavier Yates that drew her, despite the danger he represented to her carefully constructed facade. The remainder of the week passed in a blur of lessons, getting to know her students, and establishing routines. Abigail found herself thriving in the classroom, her natural teaching abilities blossoming in this simple environment. The children responded well to her methods, and even Elizabeth began to participate more actively. By Sunday, Abigail had become a recognized figure in Redemption Springs. She attended church services, sitting modestly in the back row, aware of curious glances but maintaining her reserved demeanor. After the service, Xavier approached with Elizabeth at his side. "My foreman will drive us to the ranch," he said, gesturing toward a wagon where a weathered man with a handlebar mustache waited. "Unless you'd prefer to ride? The wagon will be fine, thank you," Abigail replied, allowing him to help her up to the seat. The journey to the Double Y Ranch took nearly an hour, giving Abigail her first real glimpse of the Colorado landscape beyond the town. Rolling hills gave way to more dramatic terrain, with the Rocky Mountains forming a majestic backdrop against the clear blue sky. The ranch itself was impressive, a large main house built of sturdy logs, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and cattle dotting the distant pastures. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely as Xavier handed her down from the wagon. "Been in my family for 15 years, he replied, a note of pride in his voice. "My father claimed the land, built it from nothing. I've expanded it since taking over." Mrs. Morales, a plump Mexican woman with a warm smile, greeted them at the door. "Ah, la maestra," she exclaimed, enveloping Abigail in an unexpected hug. Come, dinner is ready, and you are too thin." The house was surprisingly comfortable inside, with solid furniture, colorful woven rugs, and bookshelves filled with volumes that made Abigail's heart leap with pleasure. It was a home, not just a house, with touches that spoke of care and permanence. Dinner was a revelation: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from Mrs. Morales's garden. The conversation flowed more easily than Abigail had expected, centered mostly around Elizabeth's experiences at school and ranch business. "Miss Porter has been teaching us about the different states," Elizabeth informed her uncle, more animated than Abigail had yet seen her. "Did you know there are 38 states now? And more territories that will become states someday." "Is that so?" Xavier replied, his eyes warm as they rested on his niece. "And which state would you like to visit?" "California," the girl declared. "Miss Porter says there's an ocean there, bigger than any lake, that goes on forever." Xavier's gaze shifted to Abigail. "And you, Miss Porter? Have you seen this endless ocean?" "Once, as a child," she admitted, the memory bittersweet. "My father took me to Cape Cod. The Atlantic is indeed magnificent." "Your father, is he still in Boston?" Xavier asked, and Abigail felt the conversation shifting into dangerous territory. "My parents are both deceased," she said quietly. "It wasn't a lie. I have no family left." Something in Xavier's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Family is precious." After dinner, Mrs. Morales shooed Elizabeth off to help with the promised apple pie, leaving Abigail and Xavier alone in the parlor. An awkward silence fell between them. "You have a lovely home," Abigail said finally, running her fingers along the spine of a leather-bound book. "Sarah decorated it," he replied, a shadow crossing his face. "She had a gift for making a place feel like home. You must miss her very much." He nodded, his gaze distant. "Every day? But life continues, doesn't it? We either move forward or get left behind." The simple philosophy resonated with Abigail. Yes, moving forward is the only option sometimes. His amber eyes focused intently on her face. "You speak like someone who knows about loss, Miss Porter." She looked away, discomfited by his perception. "Everyone has experienced loss of some kind, Mr. Yates." "Xavier," he corrected. "If we're going to be friends, you might as well use my given name." "Friends." The word sent a pang through Abigail's heart. How long had it been since she had allowed herself a friend? "Then you must call me Abigail," she replied, the name feeling strange on her tongue. She had been living as Miss Porter for so long that her own name had become foreign. They were interrupted by Elizabeth and Mrs. Morales bearing pie and coffee. The moment of connection broken, they returned to safer topics for the remainder of the evening. As Xavier drove her back to town in the fading light, Abigail found herself more relaxed in his company than she had been with anyone in years. The silence between them was comfortable now, both content to watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "Thank you for today," she said as they reached her cottage. It was lovely to see Elizabeth in her home environment. "She likes you," he replied, jumping down to help her from the wagon. "She doesn't warm to people easily. Not since her parents died. Children are resilient, but they need time to heal," Abigail said, thinking of her own painful childhood. "Patience and consistency help." He studied her face in the twilight. "You understand children well." "It's my vocation," she replied simply. His hand still held hers from helping her down, warm and calloused. "Will you join us again next Sunday?" The invitation surprised her, but not as much as her own response. "I'd like that very much." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his rugged features and made her heart skip a beat. "Good night, Abigail." "Good night, Xavier." As she watched him drive away, Abigail acknowledged the dangerous path she was treading. Every moment spent with Xavier Yates increased the risk of her past being discovered. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret the connection forming between them. The following weeks settled into a pattern. Weekdays were devoted to teaching, with Abigail throwing herself into her work with passionate dedication. Her innovative methods and genuine care for her students quickly earned her the respect of the town. Sundays became a highlight, with church services followed by dinner at the Double Y Ranch. Elizabeth blossomed under the combined attention of her uncle and teacher, her natural intelligence finding expression in both the classroom and at home. As autumn painted the landscape in brilliant hues of red and gold, Abigail found herself increasingly drawn to Xavier. Behind his reserved exterior lay a thoughtful, intelligent man with unexpected depths. He read voraciously, could discuss politics and philosophy with equal facility, and possessed a dry wit that surfaced when he was truly comfortable. For his part, Xavier seemed equally fascinated by her. He sought her opinions on books, consulted her about Elizabeth's education, and gradually shared more of himself, his dreams for the ranch, his concerns about the changing West, his determination to give Elizabeth the stability she needed. What he didn't share was his past, and Abigail was grateful for his reticence, as it meant she could maintain her own secrets without appearing unusually guarded. They existed in a present untethered from history, and she found a freedom in this arrangement that she had never expected. October brought the first dusting of snow and preparations for the Harvest Festival, a tradition in Redemption Springs that culminated in a dance at the town hall. Abigail's students were aflutter with excitement, the girls discussing dresses and the boys pretending indifference while secretly practicing their dancing steps during recess. "You will attend, won't you, Miss Porter?" asked Emma Granger one afternoon as Abigail dismissed the class. "I hadn't given it much thought," Abigail admitted. "Oh, but you must," the child insisted. "Everyone will be there. Even Uncle Xavier is coming, and he never attends dances." Abigail's heart skipped at this information. "Is that so?" Elizabeth, gathering her books nearby, nodded solemnly. "He said we both have to go this year. For community spirit." The thought of seeing Xavier in a social setting, perhaps even dancing with him, sent a flutter through Abigail's stomach that she firmly suppressed. Such foolishness had no place in her carefully controlled life. Yet when Saturday evening arrived, she found herself contemplating her meager wardrobe with uncharacteristic concern. The blue dress she finally selected was simple but flattering, with a modestly scooped neckline and a skirt that swished pleasingly when she moved. She allowed herself the indulgence of wearing her hair looser than usual, the auburn waves framing her face softly. The town hall blazed with lamplight and bustled with activity when she arrived. Harvest decorations of corn husks, pumpkins, and autumn leaves adorned every available surface. A small band played lively tunes while couples whirled across the wooden floor. Children darted between groups of chatting adults, their excitement palpable. Abigail was immediately drawn into conversation with parents eager to discuss their children's progress. She moved among them with practiced ease, maintaining her role as the respectable schoolteacher while scanning the room for a glimpse of Xavier. She spotted him near the refreshment table, deep in conversation with Mayor Daniels. He wore a clean black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, his dark hair neatly combed back from his forehead. Even from across the room, he commanded attention, his presence magnetic. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, their eyes meeting across the crowded hall. Something intense passed between them, a current of recognition and awareness that left Abigail breathless. He excused himself from the mayor and made his way toward her, navigating the crowd with unhurried confidence. "Miss Porter," he greeted her formally, though his eyes held a warmth reserved for their private moments. "You look lovely this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Yates," she replied, equally formal in this public setting. "It's a wonderful celebration. Would you honor me with a dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Abigail hesitated only briefly before placing her fingers in his. "I'd be delighted." The band struck up a waltz as Xavier led her onto the floor. His hand at her waist was respectful, but firm as he guided her into the steps with surprising grace for such a powerfully built man. "I didn't take you for a dancer," she admitted as they moved in perfect harmony. A smile quirked his lips. "There are many things about me you don't know yet, Abigail." Yet, the word hung between them, full of promise and possibility. "Elizabeth seems to be enjoying herself," Abigail observed, nodding toward the girl who was participating in a children's game in the corner. "She's changing," Xavier said, his gaze following his niece. "Opening up again. I have you to thank for much of that. She's a remarkable child. She just needed time and attention. And understanding," he added, his eyes returning to Abigail's face. "Something you have in abundance." The waltz ended too soon, and propriety demanded they separate. But as the evening progressed, Xavier sought her out for 2 more dances, each time his hold growing incrementally more familiar, their conversation more intimate. During their 3rd dance, a lively polka that left them both laughing and breathless, Xavier leaned closer to speak in her ear. "Would you walk outside with me? The air in here is stifling." The request was innocent enough, but Abigail recognized the significance of a public stroll. In frontier society, such things were noted and commented upon. Yet she found herself nodding, unable to deny herself these moments with him. The night air was crisp with the promise of winter, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Xavier offered his arm, and they walked slowly along the main street, their breath forming small clouds in the cold. "I've never much cared for these social gatherings," Xavier admitted. "But tonight I'm glad I came." "As am I," Abigail replied softly. They stopped beneath the sprawling oak tree that shaded the small town square. In the moonlight, Xavier's face was cast in silver and shadow, his expression serious as he turned to her. "Abigail," he began, his voice low. "These past months, getting to know you, I've come to care for you a great deal." Her heart raced at the declaration. "Xavier, I know it's too soon," he interrupted gently. "I know you guard your privacy carefully. I'm not asking for anything but the chance to continue seeing you, to explore whatever this is between us." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. How long had it been since anyone had spoken to her with such honest emotion? 5 years of running, of hiding, of keeping everyone at arm's length had left her starved for genuine connection. "I care for you too," she whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. "But there are things about me you don't know." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch achingly tender. "When you're ready to share them, I'll listen. Until then, your present is enough for me." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and questioning, a whisper of contact that left her wanting more. Xavier drew back, studying her face in the moonlight, as if committing it to memory. "We should return," he said reluctantly, "before the gossips have us married off by morning." The comment, though light-hearted, sent a jolt through Abigail. Marriage. The thought had never entered her mind as a possibility, not with her past shadowing her every step. Yet standing here with Xavier, it suddenly seemed like a tantalizing dream, a normal life, a family, belonging somewhere permanently. They walked back to the dance in companionable silence, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. As they parted at the door, Xavier squeezed her hand gently. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, unable to deny herself this happiness, even knowing it might be fleeting. The following morning, Abigail attended church with a distracted mind, her thoughts continually returning to Xavier's kiss and the feelings it had awakened. She was so lost in contemplation that she barely registered the stir when a stranger entered the church halfway through the service. The man was impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, his silver-streaked dark hair and meticulously groomed mustache marking him as someone of means. He sat in the back row, his attention fixed not on the preacher but on the congregation itself, as if searching for someone. It wasn't until the service ended and people began to file out that Abigail noticed the stranger's gaze had settled on her. Something about his scrutiny sent a chill down her spine, an instinctive warning that made her heart race with sudden fear. Xavier, who had been speaking with the preacher, appeared at her side. "Everything all right?" he asked, noticing her pallor. "Yes, of course," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just a momentary headache." His concerned expression made her guilt sharpen. "Should we postpone dinner?" "No," she said quickly. "I'll be fine after some rest. Shall I come to the ranch at the usual time?" He nodded, though his eyes still showed concern. "I'll send the wagon for you." As they spoke, Abigail was acutely aware of the stranger watching their interaction. When Xavier departed with Elizabeth, the man approached, his smile polite but his eyes calculating. "Miss Porter, I presume?" he inquired, his accent distinctly Eastern. "I'm Theodore Marshall, recently arrived from St. Louis. I heard there was a new schoolteacher in town and thought I'd introduce myself." The name meant nothing to Abigail, but St. Louis sent alarm bells clanging in her mind. "How do you do, Mr. Marshall?" she replied coolly. "If you'll excuse me, I have preparations to make for tomorrow's lessons." "Of course," he said smoothly. "Perhaps another time. I'm quite interested in education myself. In fact, I've supported several schools back east." She nodded noncommittally and made her escape, walking briskly back to her cottage with her heart pounding in her chest. Once inside, she leaned against the door, fighting the panic rising within her. It couldn't be coincidence a man from St. Louis appearing just as she had begun to feel secure. But how had he found her? And what did he want? The questions tormented her as she paced her small home. If he knew about her past, her time in Redemption Springs was over. She would have to run again, start over somewhere even more remote. The thought of leaving Xavier and Elizabeth sent a pain through her chest that was almost physical. By the time Xavier's foreman arrived with the wagon, Abigail had composed herself outwardly, though anxiety still churned inside her. She considered canceling, pleading illness, but the thought of missing what might be her last peaceful moments with Xavier was unbearable. The ranch welcomed her as always, with Mrs. Morales's enthusiastic embrace and Elizabeth's shy smile. Xavier seemed to sense her disquiet despite her efforts to hide it, his amber eyes studying her with concern throughout dinner. When Elizabeth excused herself to help Mrs. Morales with dessert, Xavier reached across the table to take Abigail's hand. "Something's troubling you," he said, not a question but a statement. "Is it what I said last night? Have I pushed too fast?" "No," she assured him quickly. "Last night was wonderful." "Then what is it?" The genuine care in his voice nearly broke her composure. How she longed to confide in him, to share the burden she had carried alone for so long. But fear held her tongue. "Just tiredness," she lied, hating herself for the deception. The festival was quite exhausting. He didn't believe her she could see it in his eyes, but he didn't press further. Instead, he suggested they take coffee in the parlor while waiting for dessert. The parlor had become Abigail's favorite room in the house, with its well-stocked bookshelves and comfortable chairs arranged before the large stone fireplace. A fire crackled merrily, warding off the autumn chill as they settled into their usual seats. "I've been meaning to ask," Xavier said, changing the subject with obvious intent to ease her discomfort. "Would you consider giving Elizabeth piano lessons? We have Sarah's old piano gathering dust, and I know she expressed interest after hearing you play at church." The mundane topic was a relief. "I'd be happy to, though I'm far from an expert." "You play beautifully," he countered, "like someone who has had proper training." The observation, innocent as it was, reminded Abigail of the precariousness of her situation. Every detail of her fabricated past had to align perfectly. "My mother insisted," she explained, sticking close to the truth where possible. She believed a lady's education wasn't complete without musical accomplishment. Their conversation drifted to other topics, books they had both read, plans for the upcoming Thanksgiving celebration at school, the unusually early snowfall predicted for the coming week. Gradually, Abigail relaxed, the stranger from St. Louis receding in her mind as Xavier's warm presence enveloped her. After dessert, Mrs. Morales's spectacular apple pie and a demonstration of Elizabeth's reading progress, it was time for Abigail to return to town. Xavier insisted on driving her himself, despite his foreman's offer. "I enjoy the evening air," he said, though Abigail suspected he wanted time alone with her. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the vast sky above them. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hooves on the packed dirt road and the occasional snort from the horses the only sounds. "Abigail," Xavier said finally, his voice low in the darkness. "I meant what I said last night. I care for you more than I thought possible after Sarah died. But I sense there's something holding you back." She stared straight ahead, unable to meet his gaze. "It's complicated, Xavier." "Life usually is," he replied simply. "But some complications are worth navigating." The wagon crested a small hill, bringing the lights of Redemption Springs into view below them. Xavier drew the horses to a halt, setting the brake before turning to face her fully. "Whatever it is that troubles you," he said, taking both her hands in his, "know that you can trust me. I'm not a man who scares easily." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Abigail's eyes. "You might feel differently if you knew the truth." "Try me," he challenged gently. For one wild moment, she considered it unburdening herself, sharing the secrets that had weighed her down for so long. But the risk was too great. If he rejected her, if word spread. No, she couldn't take that chance, not even for Xavier. "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet." Instead of frustration, his face showed only understanding. "When you're ready," he said, drawing her closer. "I'll be here." His kiss was different this time, deeper, more assured, a promise rather than a question. Abigail allowed herself to melt into it, to forget her fears and the past that pursued her, if only for a moment. When they finally continued toward town, something had shifted between them again, a deepening of the connection that both thrilled and terrified her. At her cottage, Xavier helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. "Good night, Abigail," he murmured, pressing a final gentle kiss to her forehead. "Good night," she replied, reluctant to part, but knowing it was necessary. She watched him drive away, conflict raging within her. The happiness she had found with Xavier seemed increasingly at odds with the secret life she had built. Something would have to give, and soon. The next morning brought a fresh complication. As Abigail prepared the schoolhouse for the day's lessons, the door opened to admit Theodore Marshall, his smile as polished as his expensive boots. "Miss Porter," he greeted her. "I hope I'm not intruding." Abigail stiffened, her hand tightening on the chalk she held. "The children will be arriving soon, Mr. Marshall. I'm quite busy." "This won't take long," he assured her, closing the door behind him. "I merely wanted to discuss a mutual acquaintance, Judge William Harrington of St. Louis." The chalk snapped in Abigail's grip, white dust sifting to the floor like snow. Judge Harrington, the name sent ice through her veins. "I don't believe I know the gentleman," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through her. Marshall's smile turned predatory. "That's curious, considering you worked in his household for nearly 2 years before his unfortunate demise, of course." The accusation hung in the air between them. Abigail said nothing, her mind racing. Denial would be useless. This man clearly knew who she was. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "Direct." "I appreciate that." Marshall moved further into the room, examining the classroom with apparent interest. "Judge Harrington was my wife's uncle. His death was a terrible shock to the family." "I imagine it was," Abigail replied cautiously. "Particularly given the circumstances," he continued, his gaze sharp as he turned back to her. "A respected judge, murdered in his own home, and his young governess disappearing the same night along with a substantial amount of money and jewelry." Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. "Is there a point to this conversation, Mr. Marshall?" "Indeed there is." He leaned against a student's desk, entirely at ease. "I've spent considerable time and resources tracking you down, Miss Porter, or should I say, Miss Adelaide Price?" Hearing her real name spoken aloud after so long was jarring. Abigail fought to maintain her composure. The authorities in St. Louis would be very interested to know your whereabouts, Marshall continued. As with the Pinkerton detectives the family hired. What do you want? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. His smile widened. I'm a reasonable man. I understand desperation can drive people to extreme actions. I'm prepared to forget I ever found you for a price. I have very little money, she said, thinking of her meager savings. But you have a wealthy admirer, Marshall countered. Mr. Yates seems quite taken with you. I'm sure he would be generous to help a lady in distress. Horror washed over Abigail at the implication. I will not ask Xavier for money. Then perhaps you'd prefer I share what I know with him? And the town council. Marshall straightened, adjusting his immaculate cuffs. I'll give you until the end of the week to consider your options. $5,000 will ensure my permanent silence. That's an impossible sum, Abigail protested. For a schoolteacher, certainly. For the owner of the Double Y Ranch, a mere inconvenience. He moved toward the door. Friday, Miss Price. After that, I'll be forced to do my civic duty and inform the authorities. After he left, Abigail sank into her chair, trembling. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her. She had three options: pay the blackmail, run again, or face the consequences of her past. None seemed bearable. The arrival of her students forced her to compose herself, to go through the motions of teaching while her mind whirled with possible solutions. Elizabeth watched her with concerned eyes throughout the day, the girl's perception uncomfortably acute. Are you sick, Miss Porter? She asked as Abigail dismissed the class. Just tired, Elizabeth, Abigail assured her, managing a smile. Nothing to worry about. But there was everything to worry about. As soon as the children had gone, Abigail closed the schoolhouse and retreated to her cottage, where she paced the small rooms like a caged animal. She could run again. She had done it before. Start over somewhere new, perhaps California or even Mexico. But the thought of leaving Xavier and Elizabeth, of disappearing without explanation, made her physically ill. They deserved better than that. She could confess everything to Xavier, beg for his help, but the risk was enormous. If he believed the worst of her, if he rejected her, and even if he didn't, involving him in her troubles seemed unconscionable. The third option, facing justice in St. Louis, was unthinkable. She knew what awaited her there. As darkness fell, Abigail made her decision. She would run again. It was the only way to protect Xavier and Elizabeth from the scandal that would inevitably follow if the truth emerged. She began gathering her few valuable possessions, tears streaming down her face as she worked. A knock at her door startled her. Hastily wiping her eyes, she opened it to find Xavier standing there, concern etched on his features. Elizabeth said you seemed unwell, he explained. I wanted to check on you. His thoughtfulness only made her decision more painful. I'm fine, truly, she lied. Just tired. He studied her face, clearly noting the signs of tears. May I come in? Reluctantly, she stepped aside. As he entered, his gaze fell on the half-packed bag on her bed, visible through the open bedroom door. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're leaving, he said, his voice flat. Abigail couldn't meet his gaze. I have to. Why? The single word held a wealth of emotion: hurt, confusion, a touch of anger. It's complicated, she began, the same evasion she had used before. No. Xavier's voice hardened. That's not good enough, Abigail. Not anymore. Not after everything between us. She looked up then, seeing the pain in his amber eyes, and something inside her broke. The weight of secrets, of running, of constant fears suddenly became unbearable. My name isn't Abigail Porter, she whispered. It's Adelaide Price. Once the first truth escaped, the rest followed in a torrent. She told him everything about becoming a governess in Judge Harrington's household after her parents' deaths, about the judge's increasing advances, about the night he had cornered her in his study, drunk and violent in his intentions. She described the struggle, how he had struck his head on the marble fireplace when she pushed him away, the horror of realizing he was dead. I panicked, she admitted, her voice raw with remembered fear. I took money from his safe enough to start over somewhere else. I knew no one would believe me, a penniless governess, over the word of a respected judge's family. His reputation would be protected at my expense. Xavier listened without interruption, his expression grave but not condemning. When she finished, silence hung between them, heavy with the weight of her confession. "And now someone has found you," he said finally. She nodded miserably. "Theodore Marshall. He's blackmailing me $5,000 for his silence. If I don't pay by Friday, he'll go to the authorities." "That's why you were packing," Xavier concluded. "You were going to run again rather than tell me." "I didn't want to involve you in my troubles," she said. "Your reputation, your standing in the community, damn my reputation," he interrupted, his voice suddenly fierce. "Did you think so little of me? That I would turn my back on you because of something that happened years ago, something that wasn't your fault?" His anger surprised her. "Xavier, I killed a man." "You defended yourself against assault," he corrected. "Any court in this territory would call it justifiable homicide." "It wouldn't be tried in this territory," she pointed out. "And in St. Louis, with the Harrington family's influence." Xavier began to pace, his expression thunderous. "This Marshall, he came to town just to find you?" "Yes. He's the judge's nephew by marriage, apparently. And he wants $5,000. Xavier shook his head, a tidy sum for his silence. "I won't ask you for the money," Abigail said firmly. "That's not why I told you this." He stopped pacing to look at her directly. "Why did you tell me then?" The question caught her off guard. Because you deserve to know the truth before I disappeared from your life." Something in his expression softened. "And is that what you want? To disappear from my life?" "Of course not," she whispered, tears threatening again. "But I don't see another choice." Xavier closed the distance between them in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. "There's always another choice, Abigail or Adelaide, if you prefer." "I've been Abigail for so long now," she admitted. "Adelaide feels like someone else, someone from another life." "Abigail, then," he said, his thumbs gently stroking the backs of her hands. "I need you to trust me. Will you do that?" She looked up into his amber eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity and determination. "Yes," she said finally. "Good. Now, I want you to continue as normal. Teach your classes, maintain your routine. Act as if nothing is wrong. And Marshall, leave Marshall to me," Xavier said, his jaw set in a way that might have frightened Abigail if directed at her. "I'll handle him." "Xavier, I can't let you," he silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. "You're not alone anymore, Abigail. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The promise brought fresh tears to her eyes. How long had she yearned to hear those words, to have someone stand beside her instead of facing the world alone. Xavier drew her into his arms, holding her as she cried, his strong hand stroking her back soothingly. When her tears subsided, he tilted her face up to his. "I love you," he said simply. "Your past doesn't change that. Nothing could." The declaration, so unexpected yet so desperately wanted, left Abigail speechless. Xavier smiled at her stunned expression. "You don't have to say it back," he assured her. "Not until you're ready. But I wanted you to know. I do love you," she whispered, the truth of it washing through her like a cleansing tide. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. Loving someone means having something to lose. Or something to fight for," he countered, kissing her gently. When he left an hour later, Abigail felt lighter than she had in years, despite the danger still looming. She had shared her darkest secret, and instead of rejection, she had found acceptance and love. Whatever happened with Marshall, she would no longer face it alone. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Abigail taught her classes, attended to her duties, and presented a calm facade to the town, all while anxiety gnawed at her insides. Xavier was conspicuously absent, having ridden to Denver on ranch business, according to Elizabeth. Marshall made his presence felt around town, ingratiating himself with the local merchants and even visiting the school to observe American educational methods. His pointed comments and smug smiles kept Abigail on edge, a constant reminder of the sword hanging over her head. By Thursday, with no word from Xavier and Marshall's deadline looming the next day, Abigail's composure began to crack. After dismissing her students, she sat at her desk, contemplating her options once more. Perhaps running was still the best choice for everyone. The schoolhouse door opened, admitting not Marshall as she feared, but Sheriff Tanner, a grizzled veteran of the frontier with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Miss Porter," he greeted her. "Might I have a word?" Heart-pounding, Abigail nodded. "Of course, Sheriff. Is something wrong?" "That remains to be seen." He removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. Had an interesting visitor today, a Pinkerton detective from Denver. The room seemed to tilt sideways, but Abigail gripped her desk, forcing herself to remain calm. Indeed, said he was investigating a blackmail operation. Seems our visitor, Mr. Marshall, isn't who he claims to be. The sheriff's weathered face showed no emotion. His real name is George Farley. He's wanted in 3 states for fraud and extortion. Relief warred with confusion in Abigail's mind. I don't understand. Patterns always the same. Sheriff Tanner continued. He finds folks with secrets they'd rather keep hidden, threatens exposure, collects his money, and moves on. Sometimes he even invents the secrets. And the Pinkerton detective? Abigail asked, trying to make sense of this unexpected development. Hired by Xavier Yates 3 days ago. Asked them to look into Marshall or Farley immediately. They telegraphed their findings this morning, and I arrested him an hour ago. Xavier. Of course. He hadn't abandoned her. He had been working to solve the problem in his own way. Sheriff, Abigail began hesitantly. Did the detective mention anything else? Sheriff Tanner studied her face. Like what, Miss Porter? About me, she admitted. About my past. Understanding dawned in the sheriff's eyes. So there was truth to Farley's claims? Abigail nodded miserably. Some, yes. To her surprise, the sheriff merely shrugged. Don't much care what happened back east, Miss Porter. You've been nothing but good for this town since you arrived. Way I see it, your past is your business. But if there are warrants, are there? He interrupted. Abigail considered the question. She had assumed so, but in truth, she had fled before any investigation could take place. I don't know, she admitted. Well, if any come across my desk, we'll deal with them then. He replaced his hat. Until that happens, you're Miss Abigail Porter, schoolteacher of Redemption Springs, and that's all anyone needs to know. The simple acceptance left Abigail speechless. As the sheriff turned to leave, he paused at the door. Xavier will be back tomorrow morning. Thought you'd want to know. After he left, Abigail sat in stunned silence. Marshall or Farley was a fraud. The immediate threat had been neutralized by Xavier's quick thinking. But the larger issue remained. Her past, her true identity, the death of Judge Harrington. Would those ghosts ever stop pursuing her? The answer came the following day, with Xavier's return. He arrived at the schoolhouse just as Abigail was dismissing her students for the weekend. Elizabeth ran to him with a glad cry, while Abigail hung back, her emotions too complex for such a simple greeting. After embracing his niece, Xavier sent her ahead to the wagon. Give us a moment, Lizzie, he said, his eyes never leaving Abigail's face. When they were alone, he crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. Sheriff Tanner told you about Farley? She nodded. Thank you for what you did. That's not all I did, he replied. The Pinkertons are thorough. Once I explained the situation, they investigated Judge Harrington's death as well. Abigail's breath caught. And the case was closed years ago, Xavier said, his thumbs gently stroking her hands. After you fled, the housekeeper came forward. She had witnessed Harrington's advances toward you on multiple occasions and had reported them to his wife, who ignored her concerns. Mrs. Collins, Abigail breathed, remembering the kind-hearted housekeeper who had often tried to protect her. Her testimony, combined with evidence of Harrington's proclivities toward young women in his household, led the authorities to rule his death accidental. There are no warrants for your arrest, Abigail. There never were. The revelation staggered her. All this time, I've been running from nothing. Not nothing, Xavier corrected. You were running from the trauma of what happened, from the fear and uncertainty. That was real, even if the legal pursuit wasn't. Tears blurred Abigail's vision as 5 years of constant vigilance, of looking over her shoulder, of never allowing herself to form attachments, suddenly seemed unnecessary. I don't know whether to laugh or cry, she admitted. You could do both, Xavier suggested with a gentle smile. Or you could marry me instead. The proposal, so casually delivered, left her momentarily speechless. What? Xavier's smile widened at her shock. I said, you could marry me. Unless you'd prefer to continue as the town's schoolmarm indefinitely. You're proposing now? Here. I've never been one for conventional timing, he admitted. But yes, I'm asking you to be my wife, to help me raise Elizabeth, to build a life together at the Double Y. I love you, Abigail Porter or Adelaide Price or whoever you choose to be. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." The simplicity and sincerity of his words touched her deeply. "What about the town? If they learn about my past, they won't," Xavier assured her. "The Pinkertons were discreet, and Farley will be prosecuted for his other crimes, not for trying to blackmail you. But even if the truth did come out someday, this is the West. People understand starting over, reinventing yourself. It's what most of us came here to do." Abigail considered his words, the fear that had been her constant companion for so long gradually giving way to hope. "You really want to marry me? Even knowing everything, especially knowing everything," he replied, drawing her closer. "You survived, Abigail. You protected yourself, you started over, you built a new life. That kind of strength, that kind of courage, it's exactly what I want in the woman who stands beside me, who helps raise Elizabeth." The mention of the girl made Abigail smile. "She'll need a mother's guidance soon. She's growing so quickly. Is that a yes?" Abigail laughed, a free and joyous sound she had almost forgotten she was capable of making. "Yes, Xavier Yates. I will marry you." His kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Xavier kept his arms around her. "There's something else," he said, his expression turning serious. "While I was in Denver, I telegraphed St. Louis. Mrs. Collins, the housekeeper, is still alive. I asked if she would consider coming to Redemption Springs for our wedding." Abigail's eyes widened. "You did that for me?" "She was the only person from your past who stood by you," Xavier explained. "I thought you might want to reconnect with her, to have someone who knew Adelaide at our wedding." The thoughtfulness of the gesture moved Abigail deeply. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church of Redemption Springs, with the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Collins, a dignified woman in her 60s, watched with tears in her eyes as Adelaide Price, now truly becoming Abigail Yates, exchanged vows with Xavier. Elizabeth served as Abigail's maid of honor, beaming with pride in her new blue dress as she stood beside the woman who would now officially be her aunt, though she had already taken to calling Abigail mother in private moments that never failed to bring tears to Abigail's eyes. Sheriff Tanner gave the bride away, gruffly emotional beneath his weathered exterior. Mrs. Holbrook wept openly, declaring it the most romantic event in Redemption Springs history. Mrs. Morales prepared a feast that the town would talk about for years to come. As Xavier led her in their first dance as husband and wife, Abigail felt a sense of peace she had thought forever beyond her reach. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her future. "Happy," Xavier murmured against her ear as they swayed to the music. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. His amber eyes, warm with love, held hers. "This is just the beginning, Mrs. Yates. Just the beginning." 3 years later, Abigail stood on the porch of the Double Y Ranch house, watching as Xavier taught their 2-year-old son, Matthew, to sit on his first pony. Elizabeth, now 13 and blossoming into a beautiful young woman, supervised carefully, her hands ready to catch her little brother if he wobbled. The sound of their laughter carried across the yard, a melody that never failed to fill Abigail's heart with joy. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, where their second child, a daughter, she suspected would arrive before winter. Mrs. Collins, who had never returned to St. Louis after the wedding, preferring to accept Xavier and Abigail's invitation to live with them as a beloved grandmother figure to the children, joined her on the porch. "They make a handsome picture," the older woman observed, smiling at the scene before them. "They do," Abigail agreed. "I never imagined I could be this happy, Mrs. Collins." "I knew you would find your way eventually, my dear," the housekeeper replied, patting her hand. "Some souls are too good not to find happiness in the end." Xavier looked up then, catching Abigail's eye across the yard. His smile, still as heart-stopping as the first time she had seen it, held all the love and security she had once thought forever beyond her reach. He said something to Elizabeth, who took the lead rope of Matthew's pony, before striding toward the porch with purposeful steps. When he reached Abigail, he wrapped his arms around her, one hand gently caressing her belly. "I was just telling our son about how I met his beautiful mother," Xavier said, pressing a kiss to her temple. about how she came to town with secrets in her eyes and courage in her heart. And did you tell him how his father refused to give up until he learned those secrets? Abigail teased. I may have mentioned my persistence, Xavier acknowledged with a grin, and how it was rewarded beyond my wildest dreams. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Abigail leaned into her husband's embrace, surrounded by the family they had built together. Her past had not been erased, it had been accepted, integrated into the tapestry of her present. Adelaide Price had fled in fear and desperation. Abigail Porter had sought anonymity and safety. But Abigail Yates had found something far more precious, a home where she could be fully known and fully loved, secrets and all. In the dying light of the day, with Xavier's strong arms around her and their children's laughter filling the air, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she had finally, truly stopped running.